Great! Now that you know what the task data looks like, let's talk about how to access that data through a provider. To build a custom content provider, the first step is to create a new provider class that extends from the abstract content provider class that's part of the Android SDK, and there's a link to this documentation below if you want to learn more. For the To-Do List app, this is included in your starter code as a class named Task Content Provider. Extending from Android's Content Provider class ensures that the Task Content Provider will be recognized as a valid provider, and that it will override all the necessary methods for manipulating data. Adding to this class, you'll implement its onCreate function, which is called to initialize the Task Content Provider. The second step is to register this new provider in the Android manifest file. Content providers need to be registered similar to activities, so that your app knows that the provider exists and knows how to refer to it by name and authority. You'll also need to define URIs that identify the Task Content Provider and the different data types that it can return. These are needed so that later on, a content resolver can find the provider and the specific data you want to access just based on a given URI. Once you define these, you'll then update the Task Contract class to include URIs and string constants that will help you refer to the most commonly used URIs. The last step in working with URIs is to build a URI matcher. This is a class that helps a content provider recognize and respond correctly to different types of URIs. For example, it's often useful to use this matcher to distinguish between URIs that point to a large dataset, like multiple rows of task data, and URIs that point to a subset of that data, like data for an individual task. And we'll learn more about this later on. And finally, in the Task Content Provider class, you'll be implementing the required CRUD methods to access and change data, methods like query and insert. Now let's tackle the first step and start coding.